Welcome to High Sobriety. Our goal is to save lives and remove the stigma of addiction. Here's the host of High Sobriety, John Mabry.
Hello, and welcome to High Sobriety. I'm your host, John Mabry. Our guest today is Laura-Lee Rosano. Laura-Lee works a recovery program herself, and she understands firsthand the benefits of a healthy family. She began working at Edgewood Treatment Center in 1998 and has had the privilege of working with both patients and their families. In the past years, Laura-Lee has written 3 novels, Gracie's Secret, Jagged Little Edges, and Jagged Little Lies. Her hope is that her honesty of her books will help those dealing with unhealthy behaviors and addiction. She's also a frequent blogger here for Addiction Campuses, and so I want to welcome you to the call. Thank you so much for being on with us today. How are you?
I'm great, and thank you so much for having me on with you today.
Well, let's just go ahead and dive right in. I want to see, so I have heard some stories about you and read a few things, but would love for you to explain to our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Sure.
It sounds like you can see addiction and substance use disorder, mental health issues from many different angles. It sounds like from not just yourself, but also having family members and loved ones surrounding you that have dealt with the issue. So you're not just looking at it from one perspective, but many. So if you can go ahead and dive into that for us, that'd be great.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I like to tell people addiction. I was born into this, and I do. I can step in many shoes. But I grew up in an alcoholic home, and I just want to say, I think, when your kid's growing up in an alcoholic home, it's not an alcoholic home. It's just a normal home to you. And my parents were doing the best they could, just like any family is, I think. But growing up in an alcoholic home, I was woefully ill-equipped to deal with the harsh realities in my life. I didn't even know they were abnormal realities. Abnormal was my normal. So, in addicted homes, you don't learn how to work through problems, and you certainly don't develop healthy communication skills. So what I learned to do is I learned to avoid problems and react to my emotions. So anytime I was confronted with uncomfortable feelings or there was some type of issue, I either blew up, shut down, or I ran away. And those were my coping skills. Mm-hmm. So yeah, and those are the type of skills I think most of us that struggle with addiction or substance use disorder are already kind of coming equipped with before a lot of us ever pick up anything. So those are my coping skills, and and my first serious love, I think I was all of the age of 15, and I was head over heels in love, and of course he was an actively using addict, and I didn't see him that way. I had defined addiction as my father. So my dad was an extremely successful man. On the outside, he held a very high-pressure job. He was in management of a company with thousands and thousands of employees, and he did really well there. He came home, took the suit off, pulled the bottle out, and drank until he passed out. And so in the inside of our home never really, nobody knew what was happening inside. And I think with addiction, that's something that's pretty relevant too. Most of us hide, our insides don't match our outsides. Mm-hmm. So I thought, addiction was somebody that drank until they passed out with their face in the plate. And that's what an alcoholic was. They were someone who slurred their words, drank too much. And I certainly wasn't going to be like that, and I wasn't attracted to men like that. So the fellow I met and fell in love with, he was a drug abuser, and he really didn't drink much. So in my mind, he had no problem. However, he was verbally and physically abusive, and by that point in my life, I didn't identify that as verbally and physically abusive. I was already tolerant of unhealthy behavior, so those weren't a problem to me whatsoever. And he was also emotionally unavailable, which was very normal too. As a matter of fact, if anyone had been emotionally available to me, I would have thought that was very strange and probably ran from them. So I became a teen mom very early with no support really from him. And our relationship ended, And I got into another one right away. I mean, why grieve when you can replace, right?
Yeah.
I say that sarcastically now, but honest to goodness, that's just how it was for me back then. I didn't feel things. I shut them down, avoided them, reacted to them, or numbed them out. So, I got into another relationship and I married very young. I found a job that suited me perfectly. I began working in the bars. And, of course, you can do a lot of partying in the bars. And just kind of a little statistic for your listeners, going back to school and stats and everything, you learn some of the highest professions affected, that have folks struggling with addiction, and a couple of them are. Not one of them almost is the hospitality trade. So I wasn't alone in my drinking habits. There was a lot of us out there partying, but I worked in the bar, and I was dysfunctional, I think, almost in all my relationships, particularly in the most important one, which was with me. And I had poor parenting skills. And to cope, I continued spending more and more time using and abusing drugs and alcohol. So I won't get into the long story of it. It took a long period of years for me to lose everything, but eventually that's what happened. I did lose everything, and I think through that descent, I kept thinking and trying and thinking, okay, well, maybe I'll give this up and try that, or I'll do this and do that. And like most people with addiction, we come up with a million plans and try to control things and, and eventually, justify and rationalize why we continue using. But comes a point when you start to understand that you have lost control of this thing, that you don't control it controls you. And, and at that point, when that aha moment comes in, you either have to go harder to escape that reality, or you kind of have to give up if you're not going to get into treatment or anything. So I did. I lost everything. I lost a really good relationship I was in at that point, and I became homeless. And eventually, and I didn't see it then, and I hope people hear this now, the best thing that ever happened to me in my entire addiction was people stopped giving me what I wanted. So I had no one to bum money off of. I was fired from a job. I was penniless, homeless, and even the addicts that I had befriended stopped fronting me. So I literally had nothing, and I remember crawling under the cement ramp one night with a sleeping bag and nothing else. I didn't have cigarettes. I was out of drugs. I crawled under there, and my problem finally became real. For the very first time in that 20-year run, it got real. And, and the next day I crawled out and I made a phone call to my parents, and I had no interest in really getting well. I went to treatment to learn a couple of things. I wanted to, first of all, get some detox meds in me because I was really sick. I was hungry, I was cold, I was scared. So I thought, well, I'm going to go into detox. I'm going to get some meds. I'm going to get a shower and a meal in me, maybe have a good night's sleep or two. And then I'm going to bum money off people in there, because up until that point, I had been able to manipulate my surroundings always. Really, I always had. And so I figured this would happen in there too. And it didn't. For the very first time in my life, I couldn't manipulate my surroundings, and that was interesting. I don't know about other addicted persons, but I wasn't very good with the answer no. And when you can't manipulate your surroundings, you're kind of forced to stand and deal, right? So anyhow, I couldn't get out of treatment because I had nowhere to go, and in spite of my not wanting to be there and not wanting to get well and all of that stuff, the miracle started to happen. And I want everyone listening to the show to know that do not buy into the myths of addicted persons must want to go to treatment or it won't get well. That is utterly and absolutely not true. any treatment center worth their salt, like addiction campuses, and there's some good ones out there. They can break through that denial and they can break through that delusion, and in spite of yourself, you can get well with the right help. And after working in treatment for 18 years, I don't think I've met too many people who actually ever wanted to be there, and lots of them got well. Lots and lots of them got well. So with the right help, you can do that. And then after treatment, I went back to school and I attended 12-step meetings, and I began working in the treatment center that I went through. So that's just a little bit of what happened for me.
Wow. And so how long ago was that? 1998 or so?
Well, I went through in 1997. But I started working in the rehab in 1999 because I needed to go back to school and do a few things before I went there. And so a part of my course was I had a practicum offered to me, and I went back to the facility I went through and asked if I could do some volunteer hours through a clinical supervisor. And they said, sure, come on board. And so I did some volunteer hours. And about 8 weeks later, they offered me a position starting as a support staff, and I worked up from there.
Nice.
Yeah.
And so was that your first and only time in treatment? Did it take, for me, I went through addiction campuses, was my 4th round of treatment when it, things finally clicked for me. Was that the case for you, going through multiple times, or was it just the one time and you were at your wit's end to give it up and try something new?
Well, as far as treatment, that was my first time through treatment. Actual treatment, the one that deals with group therapy and cognitive behavior therapy and psychiatric and medical overview, at least the treatment center of that quality. Before that, I'd gone through detox, and I thought that was treatment. I'd gone through outpatient programs, and I thought that was treatment. 12-step meetings, and I thought that was treatment. But the type of, the quality of treatment, and I think that most people don't understand that either. I mean, you have 28-day treatment centers. There's all sorts of services provided, but I'd never had the quality of care I had up until that point, because I think when you struggle with addiction, there's more than just putting down the drinking and the drugging. Really, seriously, you're going to need thorough psychiatric evaluation. You'll need medical evaluation. You need treatment specialists that have master's degrees and different therapists and different skills and abilities and things like that. So you really almost need a whole team of people to start putting those pieces back together for you to make progress and move forward. So up until that point, I had many attempts. As a matter of fact, one time after attending an outpatient program, it became very clear through my working in, the bars that, okay, I drank too much. So they suggested I stop drinking. And I thought, well, that's no problem. I really don't have a drinking problem. At least I didn't think I had a drinking problem. So I put down the booze and I didn't drink for a year. But what I didn't tell anyone was in that year I picked up a severe cocaine habit. So, hey, not drinking was easy, right? And, so what I did is I was a substance abuser. I would switch out one drug for another, to get up in the morning, I'd use opioids, Tylenol 3 and other products, codeine, and then to go to work, I'd use cocaine. And so and then I drank, or I'd use something else to come down. So I was always switching it up. By the time, so I tried different solutions, but in 1997, I found the help that really worked for me.
Nice. I think it's so important for listeners to hear. If you're not sure if this is relating to you or you can relate to it, if you have the disease of addiction or a substance use disorder, that taking a team approach and taking a comprehensive approach, in my experience, and sounds like in yours as well, was the most effective, as opposed to when I just tried to do some patchwork and just went to do X or Y, I didn't get the effect that I truly needed. No. And just somebody, we're dealing with a chronic disease, and it's not an acute issue, and so treating it in an acute way didn't work for me. And I had a chronic disease of alcoholism and substance use disorder, and I needed a long-term solution. And just like if somebody has cancer or diabetes or heart disease, these are chronic diseases. You can't just go and get one shot and okay, now you're fixed. fix. You can't just go and see, get one medication and that work for you most of the time. A lot of times it's a team approach, multidisciplinary approach, diet, exercise, sleep, these kinds of things a lot of people don't consider. When you're in your addiction and alcoholism, that stuff just gets so out of whack that your body and your mind are just not really processing on a level that they should. And so, surrounding yourself with a team, being out in LA and working in the entertainment industry for several years, like I did, like everybody wanted a team around them. You wanted a manager and an agent, a publicist, and you wanted groupies and a nutritionist, and you needed a personal trainer. And you know what? Like I wanted that for so long, and it just got me nowhere. And in recovery, I have found that. I have found through, support groups. I found through, treatment. I found through psychiatrists, psychologists, church pastor, sponsor, these types of people. I've surrounded myself with team people because I cannot do this alone. I cannot do this on my own.
No, absolutely. And most of us tend to look at addiction as a drug or alcohol problem or a behavioral problem, gambling, eating, shopping, whatever, overworking. But that's just the pimple on the body, if you will, because addiction is so much more than that. If you take away all the substance and all the behavior, you've still got a huge, huge problem. And so, you got to get down to the underlying issues and really treat those four bodies that you were speaking about, the physical and emotional and psychological and spiritual body, until those four all are whole and come together, you're going to struggle in one area or another. And all of us that struggle with addiction want that quick fix. We want this stuff to happen. Well, we're used to taking a pill and magic happening right away. Mm-hmm. So, working for something, waiting for something, patience, those are all really difficult things when you're an addicted person.
And one thing that I found in my journey is I had some traumatic events happen later on in my young adult and adult life. But until I went to a trauma therapist that said, look, I don't care what happened to you later on in life. She goes, what happened to you as a child?
Right.
And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, nothing happened to me. She was like, something happened early on that set the tone for how you reacted when these other things happened. And I said, well, the only thing I can think of is I had some ear surgeries as a kid. And so I said, well, I had 6 ear surgeries as a kid. My left ear, I have a transplanted eardrum in, and 3 bones are prosthetic bones that I had to, go out of state to have put in. So come to find out, she goes, boom, that's where I want to start. And I'm like, man, don't waste my time like that. I was a child. Man, my whole life was revolved around that trauma as a child.
Yeah.
And she goes, until you get back to that. And so when we started dissecting it, feelings of, man, me feeling afraid, and I'm insecure, I'm not good enough, I'm defective, this crawling underneath my skin that I could never really scratch. As soon as I found drugs and alcohol, it was like, boom, now I can actually cope with what's going on. And so I say that to this kind of segues into my next question to you is, you had a blog post called Mommy, Please Come Home, and your focus is on children of addicted parents. And that blog post was particularly personal. Would you tell our listeners about the psychological harm to children that comes from having an addicted parents? Because that sets up a whole nother set of issues when your children are witnessing things that could potentially cause them to want to use or cover things up later on in life.
Well, as a child, I remember crawling into my mom and dad's bed. My mom was kind of the safe person in my life, although she was extremely distracted with my dad. Her job was to manage him and monitor his drinking, and so he was pretty much her full-time job. But I remember their fights and being little, and you talk about the trauma as a child, creeping into their room at night because I was experiencing night terrors, but of course I was 5 and 6 and 7 and 8, and I didn't know those terms, and we didn't talk about things like that in my house. But I remember I would have the worst nightmares. They would just scare me. My heart felt like it would burst out of my chest. And so I would creep into her room. They had hardwood floors, and I would sleep on the floor beside her bed in the dark because I just couldn't bear the dark in my own room. And then, but when it would become light out, I'd creep out because I didn't want to wake them up, and I was never allowed in their room. So I didn't put that terror as a child together with what I was doing to my own child. Again, because I differentiated between substance, I thought it was a different thing. That was alcohol in that family. My problem was drugs, which is nothing, like alcohol. I didn't put it together at all. So My little girl, I made a post on, I decided to, I do a lot of posting about my own experiences, and why I do that is I hope to promote people to come forward and own things. And it isn't until you own your past, you feel your past, that you can recover from that place. And the truth is, a lot of damage was done to me as a child, and I ended up repeating that cycle and doing a terrific amount of damage to my own children. And all I needed to hear in recovery from my dad, which would make a huge difference, he can't go back and clean up the past, but what I needed, what that little girl in me, what that child needed to heal, was just someone to acknowledge her pain. And so when that pain isn't acknowledged, you kind of recreate that cycle. So when I was really in the throes of my addiction, and my little girl was about 6, she always knew when I was going to use before I did. She could feel the tenseness in me, and I never wanted to be a bad mommy. Mm-hmm. My goal wasn't to leave scars on my children. I had something bigger than me making a lot of decisions, and I was oblivious to it, but she could feel the buildup. I would clean and be the perfect parent for days, and then I would feel like I deserved to treat myself, and I would go reward myself. Usually started with a glass of wine, and then it ended up into the other stuff. So anyhow, I was the same thing. I had been this perfect mom at the PTA meetings, doing all these things. The house was spotless, the clothes were spotless, the children were spotless. It was all outward stuff. And sure enough, I had a drink and then went to the bar and then started into substance. And I ended up at the after party and then into a crack shack. And I was on about the 3rd day, and it was awful, and there's nothing real happening within that bubble. There's nothing, there's no kids, there's no mortgage, there's no people, there's just more, and there's just drugs. And so there was a little knock at the door, and there was only a couple of us left, and a guy reached over and he yanked open the door, and I knew by the sound of the knock that this was not going to be good. And I tried to stop him from opening it, but I was too late, and he opened up the door. And there was my little girl, just as beautiful as you can imagine. I can still remember her. She had braids. Her dad must have tried to clean her up. She had 2 long braids, and she was in a little white dress, and her cheeks were pink, and her eyes were red and wide open. And she said, "Mommy, can you please come home?" And, if that isn't enough to break a healthy mother's heart, I don't know what is. But she unfortunately didn't have a healthy mom. She had a mom that was really caught up in addiction. So I was enraged, and I screamed at my husband, "How could you bring her here? This is a crack shack. What kind of father does that?" I blamed everything on him. We kind of yelled at each other with her sandwiched in the middle of us. And she got to experience this all. So he went home, and I think I stayed and did more and felt very righteous about it, And that's the truth. That's the reality of addiction. It's really awful. And kids growing up in it learn that feelings are dangerous, and they learn to shut them down, and they learn to not tell anyone what's going on in their home, and the spouse in addicted homes often confides their problems to children who aren't old enough to cope with them. Mm-hmm. So, my husband went off in the car and said, your mom's an addict, and I don't know what she's doing in there. And he laid all this crap on her, and I had already laid it on her. So, so she learned to grow up walking on eggshells, trying to make dad feel better, walking on eggshells around me. And then she became feeling very responsible for all the adults in her life and all the people in her life. And so children that grow up in addicted homes, they have abandonment issues. They have control issues. And when they're old enough to get into relationships, their love relationships will resemble a power struggle. The thinking is, if you love me, you will think like me. You will feel like me. You will agree with me, because that's what they're taught in their growing up homes. They don't have boundaries. They're not separate. Their survival mode is don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. And in relationships, when you can't communicate, you're not able to become vulnerable. So kids growing up in addicted homes will have trouble with intimacy, and they will act out through people pleasing, and they will express passive aggressive behaviors. And children of addicted parents are 4 times more likely to grow up and repeat the cycle, either becoming addicted or marrying someone who is. I mean, most people don't understand addiction is an illogical, impulsive illness, really where the perpetrator becomes the victim of their own thoughts and impulses. So it is really a multi-layered problem here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's I'm kind of speechless, to be honest with you. Hearing the story of your daughter coming to the door and asking you, Mom, come on home, and
yeah.
But like being a recovering alcoholic and addict myself, I'm like, oh, of course you're gonna get mad. I mean, because I had family members trying to help me. I had my wife trying to reach out to my parents for help, and and then I get mad at her for going, why would you tell my parents that I'm doing X, Y, or Z? Like,
exactly.
Do you know you're gonna ruin my relationship with my parents?
Yeah, so we're training them to shut up. We're training them to tolerate intolerable, abusive, emotionally violent behavior, and we're also telling them, if you love me, you'll do this for me. And so in order for them to stay in relationship with us, they have to become sick. They have to lower their bar. They have to expect not to get their needs met. As a matter of fact, they need to know that our needs are more important than theirs. So, and we believe that, so it's really sick. And it isn't that, we're the only ones sick in this. The people that love us and stay in relationship with us get equally as sick. And I believe, John, I really believe, working with families for those 18 years, like, it was easy to see the addicted person sick. They're the ones shoving drugs up their nose, needles in their vein, drinking their faces off, falling down. They're creating all the problems. But the truth is, the people staying in relationship with addicted persons are equally as sick. And they lower their bar over time and get equally as sick. And they're not doing drugs and alcohol. They're getting sick with their without anything in their system. And physically, an addict, their physical body deteriorates, their emotional body deteriorates, their cognitive body deteriorates, their spiritual body deteriorates. But the family's body, those 4 bodies, deteriorate equally along with the addicted person. So that's kind of the disease of family. And most families, I can't tell you how many times I have moms furious with me because my message is, you got to take your eyes off them. Really, look at your own life. Your marriage is ending. You're in financial difficulty. You're not sleeping. Mm-hmm. There's so many problems happening with you. And the belief is, if that addicted person gets well, I'll be okay. So now my well-being is firmly entrenched in another person, and I don't have any power there. That's pretty scary. And so the family tries harder and harder and harder to make that addicted person well, and of course they can't, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh man, this is profound stuff. If for those of you just might be tuning in, we're talking to Laura Lee Rosano. She's talking about how abnormal was her normal growing up, and daughter of an alcoholic father. Her coping skills she learned early on just to avoid problems and run away.
Yeah.
She learned early on that her insides did not match her outsides, and ultimately after 20 so years of abuse, became homeless. And a time of great help was when people quit helping you.
Yes.
When people stopped helping you and stopped giving you things, that's when you reached a new level of desperation, it sounded like.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you've been working in the field of recovery for a few decades now, and want to transition into talking about. Let's go into your books. So you've authored 3 books. Are they a series? Is it a series of books or?
Yeah, I've actually since you probably don't know this, John. I've got 4. I wrote a series, Jagged Little Edges, Jagged Little Lies and Jagged No More. And I wrote this series to really help family and people struggling with addiction and anyone that likes to read, honestly, because, if you've been in this field and it's really difficult. I'm the child of an alcoholic. I'm the mother of an addict. I'm the wife of an addict. I'm a recovering addict. I'm the granddaughter of an alcoholic. I'm the niece of an alcoholic. And it just goes on and on and on. So I can step into a lot of shoes and wear a lot of hats. And really, the whole thing about addiction and family is we are all in this together. And we need to be able to understand it from all angles to really make a difference here. So when I started my own program of recovery and then I started working in the field, I learned so much. And it's pretty exciting to learn that. I think knowledge is power, and power is change. And so I wanted to be able to give people the gift of understanding through the eyes of everybody involved. And so I wrote a series that doesn't just include what happens when you're addicted, but what happens when you're the mom of an addict, or the sibling of an addict, or the spouse of an addict, or the father of an addict, or the girlfriend of an addict, or when you're an addict, or when you're the child of an addict, because there is so very little resources for kids these days. So I wrote a children's book called Gracie's Secret to try to promote communication in children, because what I've learned is that kids who have the ability to debrief their feelings, they can talk about their emotions, they are less likely to react to them through behaviors and eventually addiction.
Nice.
So I wanted to have this little book available for kids, and it's quite interesting what's happened with it. Treatment centers are actually using this little book in group therapy with some of their hardest patients who have difficulties really opening up and expressing emotions. So it's not only helping kids, it's actually helping people who have difficulties connecting to emotion, because, their survival, which we learn as little people, is so intact that they just have difficulties breaking through. So this book has gone on to help a lot more people than I had originally thought. So that's what the series is about. I wanted to show that there is a way out, there is hope. I wanted people to relate to the characters in there and see their behaviors, and see them for what they are, because lots of times when people are confronting us on our behaviors, we get defensive, and as soon as I become defensive, my ears close, and I'm not capable of learning or change. But if I can relate to somebody else's story, I can see myself in that, and I don't have the walls up. So there's all sorts of reasons I wrote this series. They've gone into prisons and treatment centers and schools, and they're doing really well. And so I'm really thrilled that people are relating to them. And in that relation, one of the big things that I promote in these books are, you're not bad. I know shame tells you that. You're not bad, but you are sick. And like any other person that is sick with cancer or any other disease, you cannot do this alone. You can't love an addict well. You can't make an addict well. And if you're an addict, you can't wish it away. So my big message is reach out for help. Reach out for help. And I'm hoping to lessen the stigma on mental health and addiction and really promote wellness and hope. And so that's really why I wrote this series.
Oh, that's incredible. And one of the quotes that sticks out to me that I read of yours online is there's no shame in getting well.
No.
And I think so many people, if somebody has cancer and they're going to go get cancer treatment, you're going to go to multiple doctor's appointments to go figure out exactly what's going on. You got to hit this from several different angles to figure out exactly what should be the next treatment. What's the next step?
Yeah. Somebody
has diabetes or heart disease. Okay, I need to, bring on a multidisciplinary approach like we talked about earlier. But there's no shame in going and getting help. But man, I just found out I'm type 2 diabetic. I need to go get that taken care of, or type 1. Yeah. I've got some cancer. I've got to go look at that. But when we talk about addiction, it's like, shh.
I know.
Don't talk about it.
Right.
Don't talk about it. It'll just work itself out. They just need to try harder.
Right. Exactly. And here's the thing. If I really encourage folks again to reach out to professionals, and here's why. we're pretty easy at blaming doctors for part of the opioid epidemic we are in, and they are for sure. They do own some responsibility there. But I want to say this to people listening. I and any other addicted person caught up in addiction, which means actively using, will minimize our behaviors and will minimize what we use. And so can you imagine going into a doctor's office and they have no idea? Like, I could go into my doctor's office and say, I can't sleep. My moods are all over the place. I'm losing weight, blah, 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 blah. So I can give him a little outline of my problem. And he may diagnose me with bipolar. He may diagnose me with some type of mood disorder. And he may send me out of the office with Seroquel and a Valium. And, but what he didn't get was the fact that I just was on a 3-day crack binge. And the last thing I should be doing is going out of the office with any of those medications. So, so how can you accurately diagnose a problem when you don't have all the information? And no addict who is active in their disease is going to give you all the information. They're going to protect their using. They're going to protect their behavior. They're going to minimize the impact. So do you see this struggle that we really face in this?
Oh my gosh, yes.
So I encourage families, go with them. Don't send your addicted person just by themselves.
Yes.
And as a recovery center yourself, we do have some tools to get through that. We can do alcohol and drug histories. We can do social histories. There's a lot of tools we have in our basket to break through that denial and get to the truth. Involve the families, get their take on what happens. Okay, so John says it was this way. What are your thoughts? Well, gee, John, it wasn't that way at all. It was this way. We need everybody involved here to treat this.
Absolutely, absolutely. I wish my wife would have come with me to some counseling appointments, 10 years before she actually did. Because when she did, guess what happened? The truth started coming out.
Exactly. And her healing process can begin then too, because we learn to not live in be quiet, tolerate this crap. You know what I mean? So it's really, but families, again, they're very much trained and they feel very disloyal. I mean, the code, it's like the mafia, right? Shush, it's the code of silence. And if you break that silence, that means you don't love me. And that means I'm going to get really ugly with you and you're going to pay. So, families learn to keep the peace. Don't rock the boat. Don't talk about it, minimize it, give in to them, and pretty soon that problem becomes a huge family problem, and everybody becomes sick with it. And so, I like to tell people the only thing worse than one person struggling with addiction is two. And that's what happens. That's really what happens when you stay in those relationships. But on the other hand, because it is so predictable, we already know what's going to happen when you're in relationship with addiction. It's also very treatable, but we have to get messy. It's going to get ugly. There is going to be confrontation. There are going to be feelings, and we'll get through all of that. For healing to occur, we've got to open it up and look at it all.
Yep. And the alternative is what I found is I found my brother dead from an overdose.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about it. It didn't come out. We didn't want to rock the boat. We didn't want people to know. And guess what happened? Everybody knows.
Yeah.
They end up finding out anyway.
That's right. That's right. And that's and that's my big fear. That's my big fear, honest to goodness, about what's happening today. What's happening today is we're starting to take a pretty soft approach, and I'm worried about that approach, and I think, we've become somewhat tolerant of things that are promoting and enabling and helping people stay sick. And so I know that's a different show, and maybe we can do that one day.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but exactly. I think for families who are in this, don't try to don't step out of your family system. The sickness is within your family system. It's sick. Going into the same old, come on, when are you going to get well, blah, 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 and having those same conversations for the millionth and one time, and having that same blow up and having those same results isn't going to help anything. So step out of your family system, and I know that's going to be uncomfortable for you. Step out, reach out for help, call Addiction Campuses. You guys have a toll-free number, and you have great resources, and people don't have to come to treatment there to start the conversation with you. They can get help and resources. So step out of that family dynamic, step away from the addicted person, find a quiet room, call your toll-free number, and start that conversation to say, hey, this is what's happening in my life. Do you have any suggestions? What can I do? Where can I go? And for just now, take your eyes off the addicted person, because when you start to find resources for yourself and support for yourself, you will come at this from a very different spot. And when you have boundaries and you have support, that actually will change the outcome of the addicted person. When they have nowhere left to go, then the only place they can go is to wellness, and so that's what we want to promote. We want to promote wellness, but a lot of times it doesn't even start with the addicted person. It starts with the person or the family members around them. So that would be my message and takeaway today.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much for all of that. Now, where can our listeners connect with you online? What kind of social media websites would you want to direct folks to?
Well, they can find me, Laura Lee Rosano, Facebook. I have a couple of Facebook pages. I have a large following on my public Facebook page. I'm an author, as we know, and a recovering addict. So we've got a lot of people following me there. But I also have a small group of people in a private group, and that's kind of where the magic is happening right now. There's people, there's addicted persons, newly recovering persons, family members, and people with parents of addiction. And so everybody's kind of coming together on this book group and supporting one another. So that's part of it. They can also find me on my blog, which is jaggedlittleedges.com. You can find me on Twitter or Instagram. You can find me blogging for Addiction Campuses. And it's so far, and I can't always promise this, but so far I am able to interact with my audience when they have questions. After people read my books, there's a book club started, because it is an intense read, and lots of times, and it's an intense read with a lot of moments that really get people thinking about, whoa, and starting to think about this differently, and they're kind of excited, and they want to talk, and so there's another group started just to kind of interact with people who've read the series. And as always, I try to direct them back to your toll-free number, too, because I think talking to professionals, you can just get a different lens on it. So those are some of the spots you can find me. I think, John, if people really want, I know they've emailed your campus, and emails have been forwarded on to me. So that's another way they can do it. So those are just some of the venues they can find me through.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time, Laura Lee. And we're gonna have those links and that information in here with the online with the podcast. So thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate your insights and your experience, and keep up the great work that you're doing out there in the field.
Well, thank you so much for your time, and for you, John, and your team for doing such outstanding work. I know I saw the Award of Excellence, I believe it was, not too long ago, and you guys are really making a difference, and just love what you're doing out there.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your support.
All right, you have a great day.
Thank you for listening to High Sobriety. If you or a loved one are struggling with an addiction, we can help. Call our hotline at 844-888-HELP. That's 844-888-4357. Don't wait. Call today, 844-888-HELP. High Sobriety is an Addiction Campuses podcast.